In general, shifting compliance left means that we inject compliance into the overall business development fabric, into the foundation of the business in a way that it's seamless and invisible. And it doesn't mean, of course, that compliance is merely embedded early into business processes, but instead of it, compliance is continually present in every step of the business processes. Um, when compliance, for example, controls are embedded into your business development system and into its overall security posture, a business can disrupt at rapid pace while maintaining the security and compliance maturity essential to creating customer trust and assurance.
Welcome to CyberSecurity Heroes, an Iron Scales podcast about you, the heroes of cybersecurity. You're about to hear and learn practical and experiential knowledge in our conversations with security leaders and practitioners and other influential InfoSec stars so we can become more cyber resilient and safer together. Cybersecurity Heroes is brought to you by Iron Scales, the most powerfully simple email security platform. And I'm your host, Brendan Rudd. And now, let's get into the show. Hey Esther, welcome to the show.
Hi, Brendan. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, awesome. Great to have you here today. Thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule. So if you don't mind, I would love for you to tell our listeners a little bit about you, your background, and what you're working on these days.
Sure. So as you said, my name is Esther, and I'm based in Tel Aviv, Israel, which I think is the most beautiful city in the world.
I agree. One of, at least. I have to be biased. I think my city is the most beautiful, and that's Cape Town. But again, just being biased, but I love Tel Aviv, so totally agree. In the top 5, at least.
And I've been in the InfoSec field for a decade now in a variety of positions, including 6 years in the Israeli Air Force and some consultancy companies right after. And in my last position, I was part of establishing the security team at AppsFlyer, which was a huge school for me, in my opinion. And currently, I'm the head of information security at Anecdotes. At Anecdotes, we have created the first compliance OS, which is one centralized hub for all the company's compliance needs. So, of course, it's including basic automation and evidence collection, but the OS also helps compliance leaders with all their day-to-day compliance tasks. So that is most of what I spend my time on at the moment, but I'm also very passionate about the compliance ecosystem as a whole, and I try to help others who are just starting out in the field and to build a real supportive community.
That's awesome, and I'm really looking forward to diving into the topic of compliance and, equally important, bringing in the next generation. So can't wait to get into that. But before we begin, can you share one interesting fun fact about yourself?
Sure. So I speak 3 languages because I was born and I grew up in Chile. So I'm Spanish, English, and Hebrew speaker.
Awesome. I did not know that. I learned something new. But I didn't do my homework enough, but thank you for sharing. So I'd love to open up the episode with a poll I ran recently where there was a lot of varied responses on what compliance is. And some of the responses were compliance is risk and governance, or compliance is a means to reduce risk from the lowest hanging fruit. It does not guarantee security. So what is your definition of compliance, just so we can set the stage?
I would say that it's a combination of everything people said in their responses. But I would say that compliance is actually the process of making sure your company is secure. And by saying that, I mean that eventually you have to follow security best practices in order to create an organization that is secured. In the meantime, you need to have a very, I would say, mature compliance program in order to make sure things are in places. And then you meet your security standards by meeting those compliance standards. And in my opinion, with great compliance, you can make your company be trustable. So it's kind of a certificate that companies can be trusted.
So I want to follow up with another heavily debated statement: compliance equals security. Do you agree or disagree?
So it's definitely connected. Okay. Compliance is not security. I mean, it's not equal, but it is definitely connected. Okay. Compliance doesn't mean you're secure. And this is something very important that companies and personnel needs to remember. By achieving certificates and different compliant attestations, for example, it doesn't mean you're secure, but it does mean that as a company, you have put proper times and efforts and resources, of course, on creating a better, secure organization that can be trustable, as I said in my previous answer. By having a proper compliance program, you can make sure that while scaling and growing, the company will be growing in terms of compliance in the same way. And compliance eventually help you to establish better security practices. This is it.
So to come back to the whole compliance doesn't necessarily equal security, but it's connected. Where do companies sort of fail bringing compliance and security together? Where do they fall short?
So I think that we have some misconceptions around it. When we think about, for example, small startups achieving SOC 2 because they want to start selling and doing it fast, they missed one big point that compliance is not a one time thing, right? It's something that you need to keep doing every day. And from year to year, it's scaling and growing. So this is from one hand. And from the other hand, I would say that without creating and establishing security policies and procedures from day one, it will be very hard for a compliance leader to prove or to bring it to the table and show how compliance is the company. It's always something that is going in between. This is why I said it's connected, but it's also very delicate in between of them. And it's important to remember that compliance doesn't make you secure.
Yeah, for sure, it's not a one time, once and done effort, but how can anybody from the outside know that you're following all the protocols that were put in place and that need to be there? So is that something that will never be solved, or do you have like a solution or an opinion around that part of compliance?
So it really depends on what is the company's goal. Because if a company is looking to scale and grow, then they will adopt different frameworks over time. They will start probably with something that is really basic and it will be changed over time. For example, if we're taking a company that is processing some health data, then they will need to adopt HIPAA eventually. Then by adopting HIPAA, they will be required to follow, of course, those controls that they need to be audit about. So it's not about if you're doing it right or wrong. It's about doing what's best for your company. And to understand that it's not just about how much certificate a company have, which also is great because it means that again, you're putting money and effort and you're really taking it seriously, but it's more about understanding what is really relevant for your company. But as I said before, by scaling and growing as a company, it's important to scale and grow your compliance program as well to make sure your compliance posture will every time will be better from time to time.
Yeah, maybe the better analogy is it's like a maintenance exercise, right? Like you can, I don't know, prepare for a marathon, run the race, and then never exercise again, and then you're not fit anymore, within a matter of weeks or months, right?
So I will take it into two different areas, because if we're speaking about privacy regulations, then of course you need to follow, and you're not being audited about them until something happens. If there is a huge leakage of data in a huge company, then the regulator will come and will check if they did what they needed in terms of GDPR or CCPA. But if we're speaking about more trustable certificates around security, such as SOC 2, for example, or even ISO 27001, then if you're not renew it from year to year, eventually companies will not want to work with you, because it's a huge part of the due diligence process. Today, companies wants to work with companies that are secured, because nobody wants to put their data in a company that doesn't spend time and money. And not just that, it's even deeper than that. It's not just a certification, it's about really creating a security that is secure by design. So it doesn't really matter if it's just about being certified, it's about getting it renewal from time to time.
Are companies really putting in the effort that is needed to keep this whole supply chain ecosystem secure? And is the answer really to bring in a third party governing body? Doesn't have to be connected to government, but will that make a difference in your opinion?
Yeah, so I'm not sure about it, honestly, but I think that it might happen because of what we're seeing happening, and it will be around privacy, because I think this is the most delicate part today in terms of data. Companies really want, I would say, companies are collected the data that they need in order to, provide their service, but a lot of times things are done wrong, and data is being collected with, even if in the case it's not be needed. So if we're speaking about privacy where we see there are already regulations, I think it will be expand around this area even more. About different areas, I'm not sure, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, no, it's just an interesting topic to dive into. So, can you walk us through some of the challenging discussions that you have with startups around their security programs and how you're trying to help them?
Of course. So I would say that a lot of times small startups don't really understand the value of compliance. They do understand that they need it in order to start selling. For example, every SaaS provider will need eventually a SOC 2 report to start selling. So we can see the startups trying to achieve it very, very fast, but as I mentioned before, sometimes they will forget that it's not a one time thing. And this is something that, we are also trying at anecdotes to explain, that it's not just about achieving a report, it's about understanding what's best for your company. And you need to grow and create a compliance program. And with our platform, you'll be able to scale over time with it.
And what are some of like the misconceptions you come across when interviewing customers? I know you mentioned a couple earlier, but maybe you can sort of elaborate a bit more on some of those.
Yeah, it's basically like I said before, that um, a lot of times startups wants to achieve SOC 2 just to sell. And in terms of customers, companies might think they are, they comply with some regulations, but when they actually are not. So yeah, it's the same challenges. I can tell from my own point of view, working in a startup, that creating a cybersecurity program is very challenging, because you need to pick your battles and to understand what you're dealing with first. And when it comes to compliance, I understand that in order to create, a strong compliance program, I need to create also a security program. So this is why it's really connected to each other. It cannot go one without the other, because with compliance you want to eventually prove that the processes are performance correctly in your company, if I'm speaking, in general. So by doing it, you need to create and establish policies and procedures in your company, make sure people are following it, and so on. So this would be it.
And if we take the conversation towards the startup industry, why is compliance so important to scaling a company's growth?
So listen, to be honest, we cannot forget that compliance is a sales enabler, and it's totally okay, because as long as you achieve those certificates we spoke about, and as I said before, companies today want to work with other companies that they can trust. So when you achieve those certificates and you have a strong compliance program in place, this is a bigger part of how companies do business, in every aspect of the business, by the way. By having that comprehensive plan, it allows you grow accordingly. So this is why it's so important for companies' growth, because it helps you achieve even, enter to new markets, get more clients, and so on.
And your company wrote an article recently called Shifting Compliance to the Left. Can you explain what this is about?
Of course. So, in general, shifting compliance left means that we inject compliance into the overall business development fabric, into the foundation of the business, in a way that it's seamless and invisible. And it doesn't mean, of course, that compliance is merely embedded early into business processes, but instead of it, compliance is continually present in every step of the business processes. Um, when compliance, for example, controls are embedded into your business development system and into its overall security posture, a business can disrupt at rapid pace while maintaining the security and compliance maturity essential to creating customer trust and assurance.
Got you. Thank you. How is automation helping companies with their compliance programs and efforts?
So automation is one part of it, because if we're speaking about evidence collection, then automate it help you eventually to save time and resources, and 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 instead of chasing people's in your company, then you can just do it by connecting a plugin, right? This is what part of the things that we do in anecdotes. But it's more than that. It's about being able to create a comprehensive compliance program. It's about providing a trustable platform that is based on data, because everyone today speaks about data. And we believe that with data, you can do everything. So it's not just about collect evidence in an automation way. It's about bring data to a platform, and by that normalize it to a credible evidence in this aspect. Sorry. So in anecdotes, this is why we're not an automated collection evidence. We're the first compliance OS platform.
So, if you were to give advice to companies wanting to take on a compliance program or initiative, what would be three tips of advice?
First of all, it will be to understand what your company needs, and creating around it a great compliance program. Then then start to actual work around it. I mean, it's not just about creating programs and keep them nicely in your computer. No, it's about creating work. It's if I'm speaking, for example, to a new compliance leader, then I will suggest him, first of all, understand the business. It's really important, in my opinion. Understand what actual the platform is, how it works, and what you're selling. The second will be get to know all, the department heads that you will work with them. And eventually Be your own advocate and don't be afraid to tell management what you're doing. Because, as we mentioned before, compliance is a business enabler, but not just. It's more than that. It's making sure that your company is really following security best practices.
Cybersecurity Heroes is brought to you by IronScales, an AI-powered, self-learning email security platform that helps security professionals proactively prevent, detect, and remediate phishing attacks in a matter of seconds, not hours or days. And we have an exclusive offer for our podcast listeners. Discover dormant phishing threats in your organization's mailboxes. Get a free 90-day scan back with a detailed report. Integrate in seconds with 2 clicks via API to Microsoft Office 365 and see what your current email security is missing. Go to ironscales.com/free scan to learn more.
Awesome. And then to the second part of the question, how would you recommend companies evaluate, compliance vendors? Like, what questions should you ask to make sure that you're working with a good partner?
So I think that one of the most important things will be to understand the technologies vendors offered, because eventually it's all about as long as you connect a lot of plugins to your environment, this will be easier when helping you to make your life easier. So make sure that the company you are picking supports the technologies that you are using in-house. Secondly, try to understand what other stuff rather than evidence collection they're offering, such as policy manager, risk assessment, and so on. And I really believe in chemistry. So just do what feels you good with the people you're speaking with. And don't be afraid to adopt new technology.
Would you say that compliance platforms are important, or is it 99% a manual effort? How important is it that your vendor have technology? I'm not so familiar with this space, so maybe you can just educate me there.
No, of course. So I think it's really important for your compliance growth because, as I said, the whole conversation, it's not a one-time thing. So with the right platform, you can growth and you can scale your compliance program.
Has compliance sort of by default or through lack of innovation been primarily a manual effort, and like platforms are sort of emerging to help manage and your compliance better?
Yeah, because we can see that in the past year and a half, there are so many players in the industry around this area. And nowadays, companies that are adopting our platform don't understand how they didn't do it before. Like instead of doing all this manual work, today you have one centralized place that you can do everything from it.
Got you. So basically you're disrupting on some level the consultancy piece to a more sort of centralized platform where you can work with a platform and a vendor who is sort of essentially your consultant.
It actually depends, but best practice for it is compliance leader that have its own platform, like the same way in R&D you will have Jira for tickets management, and you have EDR solutions like CrowdStrike to protect endpoints. So in this case, you have anecdotes to manage your compliance efforts.
In the past, were companies, if they weren't working with a consultant, were they developing these tools in-house and sort of long projects, long expensive projects?
Yes, so we see that there are a lot of companies that used to develop something around it internally. Of course, not in the scale as we provide today, but 100% we see companies that were doing it. And from the other hand, we see also like companies that managed everything in Excel and Google Sheets, and it's like a nightmare. Like you have so many things to follow, and it's horrible because you are not remembering anymore what you have, where do you need to prove and when, and it's like it's burden.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you for educating me. I must say I don't know too much about this space, but I'm learning with every guest that comes onto the show. So it seems that you don't need certifications or degrees to be eligible for a cybersecurity role. And a perfect example of this would be a compliance leader. So would you say that this ideology is an example of an older mentality, because compliance is not necessarily a technical role?
So I 100% agree with you, but unfortunately, as you said, the old generation don't necessarily agree. And I think that many of the challenges that we see in the cybersecurity workforce today are a result of the fact that too much value is placed on degrees and certifications, which I find it very ironic that a field that speaks so much about how it constantly evolves cares so much about a certification someone got 10 years ago. Now, no, don't get me wrong, okay? I actually have both a degree and a certification. I'm CISSP certified, and it was really challenging to achieve it. And I have learned a lot from the process, but I wouldn't say that it has given me more than my mentors and on the job training I had over the years. I was very lucky to work with people who taught me so much than just reading massive books. And this misconception also it was leads us to another cause for the challenges we face in the workforce, and that is that companies don't think that it's part of their responsibility to train their employees when it comes to cybersecurity. Now I know that some companies do, and that is great, but again, it is very ironic that people in the field of security who spend so much time explaining to the rest of the company and to management that security threats evolve every day and we need new resources and tools, don't put a bigger emphasis on training and teaching. Instead, what they do is to try to hire themselves out of their problems. So you don't need huge teams, you need great people. And in my opinion, making you have to make sure they're good at their job, and is also our responsibility as employers. And one of the most satisfying aspects of my previous role was giving an opportunity to a junior employee, and watching her today, it's amazing because if did I pay a price in the beginning for hiring someone with less experience, then of course I paid, but it has since proven worth it time and time again. Like she was so hungry to learn, and now I can see her and she's an exceptional cybersecurity professional, and I'm super proud of her. And I also proud of myself not giving up and giving an opportunity. So if I'm going back to your question, I think that the combination of putting too high value on experience and titles and not taking employee training seriously are what have led to the challenges we see today in the cybersecurity workforce.
Yeah, and we can definitely go a little bit deeper into this in a few minutes, but I want to just quickly go back to the certification piece. Would you say that in certain skills and functions of cyber, certifications play a bigger role than others? So, for example, tying this back to compliance, would you say certifications are great for the compliance role? What are your thoughts on that?
So again, I think that certifications are great because it can show you in terms of skill of a person if them are willing to learn and to spend the time and effort they need in order to pass. But I don't think that it's what makes someone a better professional in their field. And I'm sure there are people that aren't agree with me, but in my point of view, certification, especially like not in the compliance world, is what will give you a job. Okay, what
Yeah.
will give you a job eventually is someone that will open the door for you, and we know it's hard nowadays. And eventually, even me, when I will hire for my team, I want to hire people that are not afraid of technology and that they have that fire in their eyes, that they want to succeed in their roles, and they are willing to learn, and they have, most importantly, passion for the security industry. Because in my belief, the compliance leaders have to have passion for the infosec field.
If you were to give advice to someone wanting to get into compliance, what route would you advise them to take? Like, how should they go about it? What sort of skill sets would you recommend having? What passion should you have to get into compliance?
So, in my opinion, it will be, as I said before, do not be afraid of adopting new technologies, and do not afraid from tech in general, because we see from time to time as a trend that compliance are becoming more and more technical personnel. We used to get to know compliance leaders that were following Excel sheets and etc. But today it's a little bit more complex than that. And this is basically how you put more trust in those people. So be able to have communication skills, because you need to be a little bit diplomat eventually. You need to be able to speak with all departments in your company, and you need to be able to speak also with the developer teams and the legal teams and sales teams. So this is why I'm saying that you have to have a little bit of communication skills, but also do not afraid to learn new things, because it's all about learning all the time. And you also need to be really organized, because with all those sets of controls, it's impossible to follow.
Moving back to misconceptions, you say that you don't need a lot of people to run and maintain a solid cybersecurity program. And would you say this is another example of the older mentality, the older generation?
So I think that since we're in 2022 and we can see so many startups in the security popping up every month, we need to be able and be flexible with adopting new technologies. So I believe that those technologies doesn't supposed to replace employees eventually, but they do need to help them to, how would I say it, to do the most important work. Okay. So by using automation in the right way, you can create a great security team, but not having 30, 40 people. And of course, I'm speaking about companies that, I'm not talking about banks. Okay. I'm talking about SaaS unicorns companies that have around, I don't know, 1,000 employees. Then it's not about having a huge security team. It's about having a great safety net in which you can have seniors and juniors, and to create this program to keep rolling. Okay. So, in my opinion, older mentality, it's a little bit harder for them to adopt this approach. And of course, I respect them, but we are a new generation of cybersecurity professionals that want to adopt new technologies and want to be part of what's happening in the world and not get stuck in behind. And by doing that, it means that you need to be very flexible. And in my opinion, eventually, you need to create a security team that will be, as I mentioned, with junior positions and senior positions, because you can't do it without them. And this is why still you have to hire senior people. It's not, you cannot create a security team only from junior positions. And it's important to say. And by saying that, I can tell you that I got so many messages every day to my LinkedIn profile from people asking for an opportunity. And it's so hard because I don't have from where to give them the opportunity.
Yeah.
And I see how frustrated it is for them. And it's hard to see, because there are needs. I mean, there are so much open positions around there, but nobody wants to train juniors, because everyone wants to plug and play. And I get that. It's very comfortable to bring someone who knows what he does. But since everything is changing all the time, then nobody always know what to do at any time. Everyone needs to keep learning. So sometimes you need to give those opportunities and, help others. I'm sure in terms of karma, it will pay back.
I hope so. So focusing in on your situation where you can't afford to hire as much as you would like to. So within your confinements, how do you make up for having fewer people?
I can tell that at the moment it's only me. I'm the security team of Anecdotes, and I've been doing from AppSec to security operations and including the compliance, which is my bread and butter, as I would call. Um, but I don't afraid to ask questions old colleagues. And of course, at this point, since I'm not hiring, I do receive help from consultancy. So I'm paying to a consultancy to help me. Eventually, as a company, we need to achieve a penetration test, then we need to pay for it. So there are certain things that you cannot pass, but there will be that point that I will need to start establishing a team. So it's just a matter of time.
And perhaps you could give us an example from your previous roles where you could walk us through your approach to building a team. You mentioned obviously having the balance between senior and junior, but what else can you kind of share around your approach in previous roles to building out a team?
Of course. So I think that my best school was Apps Flyer. For that, honestly, I was part of establishing the team, and I wouldn't say I was a senior at the time, but I also came with like several years of experience at the moment. So it was quite in the middle. So we had the CISO that started the team alone, and then he started creating domains. So the first domain he started to establish was the security operations team, and after it was the GRC team, which I lead, and of course with the security engineering team. But we were working together the whole time. So if I learned something from it is that you need to have your area of expertise and have your senior personnel in each of those domains. And after it, it's much easier to bring juniors into that safety net.
Yeah, definitely. So sticking on this for another minute, how did you find time management? Because even in AppsFlyer, which is a big company, if your security team cannot support, or there's this sort of general opinion that if you're a small security team, you cannot have training programs in-house and therefore you cannot hire juniors. So how do you respond to that, and how did you kind of manage time between your job and training?
So the truth is that you don't need to have a big security team to provide training. And also, training doesn't have to be something that is black or white. You can bring personnel that you believe in, and then with them, it's like together. You start giving, for example, some tasks that you know that with doing those tasks, even it will take like 3 hours more than it will take if I'm doing it. By doing it with them, they will learn. So this is like training. Training doesn't have to be like an internal course or going through so many. No, it's about just bring people and let them work and let them do mistakes, because everyone does mistakes and it's okay. This is the only way you can actual grow and become better. So, in my opinion, this is how it should be done in that kind of size of companies, and I cannot wait to do it in Anecdotes. Once I will establishing and creating a team, I will definitely go by this type of design I mentioned we did in Apps Flyer, and I will definitely give junior opportunities, but I also will hire senior because things need to get done. So this, I would say, something you need to work around.
And then sort of closing out on this training piece, you mentioned that you won't grow if you only keep hiring. What did you mean by that?
We can see a lot of issues and threats and risks that you have. But by hiring people, it doesn't mean those things will be mitigated, for example. Okay. And you need to get out of your comfort zone. And by doing that, and this is what I meant about growing, is that, believe me, when you give an opportunity to someone junior, the growth is much, much, much bigger. Because I grew as a manager, I learned what patient is. I learned that you need to choose also your battles and understand that not everything will be done as you want it to be done. And it's not just about juniors, it's in general. But when you hire people and you give them the opportunity, I think that it pays off. So it helps you grow eventually in a personal way.
Before we wrap up, is there anything else you would like to share that maybe I didn't ask you that you think is important? Whatever you want to say.
I just really want to thank you for having me today, and to our listeners that are juniors, then just keep working hard until you'll get that opportunity, and it will eventually happen. I truly believe in it. Just, keep fighting for it and everything will follow.
Awesome. And we're going to hold you accountable to your words about hiring for juniors. So if anyone wants to connect with you for potential future roles, what's the best channel for people to connect with you, to stay in touch, even just to talk about compliance?
Of course, my LinkedIn is open for everyone who wants to speak with me. Feel free to reach out. I'm there.
Awesome. So thank you so much, Esther. It was a pleasure. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to Cybersecurity Heroes. Until the next time, we'll see you then. That's a wrap for this episode of Cybersecurity Heroes. Practical and experiential knowledge on a day in the life of security heroes. Catch our next episode by subscribing or following through your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening on Apple Podcast, please leave a rating for the show. They really help a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.